Well, hello and welcome to the Building Podcast. Today's topic is social value. Now, our work in construction has a huge impact on society, both in what we build, but also on how we deliver it. And I'm really pleased to have Sue Woollett here today to help explore this subject. Now, Sue is a social value manager for a regional contractor, Stepnell, and importantly, Sue chairs the social value group for Constructing Excellence Midlands. Sue, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
I'm looking forward to our discussion. We normally start, Sue, with a sort of quick explanation from you as to sort of who you are, what your organisation is, and sort of and particularly why you're passionate about what you do and how that affects the industry. So why don't you say in your own words, much better than me trying to introduce you, why don't you sort of say a few words about yourself?
Okay, so as you've said, I am a social value manager for Stepnell, and we're a regional contractor. We have our head office is based in Rugby, and then we've so far the office that I work at goes as far as Chesterfield, and we're moving over towards the northwest, and we have branches all the way down to Southampton and across to Bristol. So we kind of cover central, a bit of northern and southern England. I moved to Stepnell 2 years ago, so relatively new into the company. And I have only been in construction for 5 years. And I think I've got to stop saying I'm a newcomer now, because I think 5 years actually is quite a lot of industry experience. Before I came into construction, I did a lot of work with voluntary organisations and charities and in education. And when I came here, I came as a community coordinator. So I was a little bit skeptical about whether construction actually would walk the talk, or whether they were just trotting out bland platitudes about the good things that they did in communities. But what I've found since I've been here is that construction has a really massive heart, and I wouldn't be here 5 years later if I didn't think that social value is being done properly within the industry.
Mm. Well, brilliant. Sue, I mean, you recently gave one of the key presentations to the Constructing Excellence Summit. And I thought we perhaps ought to ask for a really easy question for you to start with, because social value means quite a lot of things within the industry. But what's your definition of social value?
You say it's an easy question. I don't think it is, because the more I do this, the more definitions I hear, and the more objections I hear to things like social value. Should it be social impact? Is it ESG? Is it CSR? And ESG and CSR aren't really terms that I'm familiar with. I think to me they feel a bit like we've moved on from there. Social impact I really can understand,
Yeah.
because we can talk a lot about the value of social value. We can try to put it into monetary terms, which helps the bean counters. But realistically, what are we doing with the communities? What are we doing to communities? And what's the long-term impact of that is really, really important about what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, just sort of draw that out a bit. Then, your social value is really about the impact on society? Would that be your definition, or the
Yeah,
beneficial impact on
absolutely. Yeah,
society?
the beneficial impact on society and the long-term legacy of what we're doing. So
Hmm.
when I first started, I went to a conference, and something that really resonated with me was them saying that, perhaps in London, like we go in. It happens that slum houses or certain houses and communities are torn down, and huge fancy apartments that few people in that community would be able to afford are built in their place. And by offering people within that community the opportunity to upskill and to take apprenticeships and work experience and learn a trade and perhaps move on and up through organisations, it does give them the opportunity to be able to afford housing in
Hmm.
that area. Um, I mean, I know from being in the industry that a lot of the people I work with started on the tools. And so they did
Absolutely.
start as apprentices, and they have worked their way up. And
Hmm.
there is that opportunity. If you're good, if you are prepared to work hard, I think probably it's fairly limitless opportunities, really. You can go from being a joiner to a site manager to a senior site manager to a projects manager, contracts
Yeah.
manager, director of a bigger company, director of a bigger company, and so it moves on.
Mm. And I think for the purpose of today's conversation, we're mostly looking at social value in terms of delivery rather than necessarily output. It's what our industry can do in terms of how we deliver stuff, not necessarily on what we leave behind. Is that a fair sort of assessment?
Yeah, I think one of the things for me with the social value theme group for constructing excellence was to get back to something that's a bit more grassroots and sharing good practice, because I think there are still a lot of people in our industry who aren't quite sure how to deliver it. They aren't quite sure what they're doing. They aren't quite sure whether they're doing it. And so for me, I want to help them understand how they can do that really.
Hmm. So, I mean, we talked around about sort of what it is. Is it measurable? Can you measure social value or not? I mean, I know with a lot of our pre-qualification questionnaires, we have to try and provide some sort of yardstick to it. But is it, yeah, for me, it's a very subjective, or can be very subjective if we're not careful.
So there are lots of different options for measuring it. Lots of different types of proxies. Some come from the government social value model.
Hmm.
Some from we have the national TOM system by social value portal. The proxies are slightly different. So the pound that's spent in a community can be worth 82p. It can be worth £2.75. It can be worth 73p. It's really confusing. And
Yeah.
if you're trying to, a lot of the time you're comparing apples and oranges, not apples and
Hmm.
apples. So one project could potentially, if lots of micro companies were being used, could potentially generate almost 3 times its the value of the project in social value. And that doesn't sit well with me. How can it really be worth that much? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Um, and then there are some social value practitioners who go through a process of creating their own proxies. So it's quite complicated. I don't, even though I've done some training on it, don't 100% understand it. But I was at a meeting where somebody said they had sent out something to several different practitioners and they'd all come back with a different value because they got a slightly different proxy.
Mm.
So I think whilst social value measurement does have some points of interest and can be useful to say, I think realistically there is a huge amount around the stories. So if we're looking as a company at social value, yes, it's nice to be able to say we did 75% local spend. We spent £4 million in the local economy, let's say. We've done 50% of turnover on social value, generated 50% of turnover. You can only say that so many times before people just go, yeah, and so what did you actually do?
Yeah.
But what you can do is you can work with organisations in the community to help track the stories of the people that you have been helping. You know, you know what I really love about construction? The number of people who can drive past something and go, "I built that," or "I did
Absolutely.
that," and isn't that amazing? That's a great legacy. But
Yeah.
also, how about I helped that person get a job?
Yeah.
Um, I gave that person a mock interview and look what they're doing now. We had a work experience in the office earlier this year, and one of the young men from that had a chat with somebody and then progressed through our interview process and application process, and has now joined us as an apprentice. So we can directly track what's happening
Mhm.
with him whilst he stays with us. But then there are lots of people that we get involved with that we can't. And so actually working with third party organisations like local charities who can track that, and who, particularly when people are facing huge disadvantages and barriers to work, those people can help us with the pastoral side of it and helping
Mm.
people move into work, and we provide the business side of doing it.
Mm. I mean, I think, one of the great things about social value is how far people can move. It's almost the effort required, not necessarily the results. I mean, it's very easy to help people to achieve things if they've nearly achieved it themselves, but actually taking some of the really difficult, opportunities and progressing those can be hugely rewarding, but really quite challenging to measure. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've all been in situations, I think, whether it's with family, friends, or acquaintances, or through work, where you can see that somebody just needs to take that extra step themselves.
mhm.
Um, I don't know whether this is even relevant really, but whether before I came into construction, I was quite anxious about what I was going to do. So I'd had quite a good career for the first 10 years of my life in
Mhm.
retail banking. And then I'd had a very long career break where I was primarily concerned with family. I did my volunteering. I trained to teach antenatal classes and facilitated those for 20 years. Worked in education, worked actually in independent schools with some of the most privileged young people in the world. And then I found myself at the age of 50 thinking, what am I going to do? I've got 17 years ahead of me and I had a good career, but where do I go from here? Because I'm just this middle-aged woman nobody's going to care about. Nobody's going to want to employ me. And so I did have that anxiety and that fear of stepping forwards. And I think there are a lot of people, younger, older, the same age as I was then, who have that same fear of stepping forwards. And I think part of social value is offering them a hand to say, come on, you can do it. Just that little bit of encouragement, either from us within the construction industry or in the wider industry, or whether you're working with a charity.
And constructions has that huge opportunity, doesn't it? Because we cover all sections of community of our society. We've got an enormous number of both blue and white collar workers in a very large geographic area, even for the smallest of projects. And we touch a lot of lives. And I think that's the opportunity, isn't it? That we can, if we can find a way of demonstrating that social value, then there's a huge opportunity for demonstrating why we should be doing more of it.
Yeah, and we're very visible, aren't we? With our hoardings and our banners and our wrapped buildings and all the rest of it, we're very, very visible. And one of the things that I will say, even if I'm working or if I meet somebody and I know Stepnell haven't got a project in that area, I will say to them, go and walk around your community and see which companies are working there, and then ring their head office and say, can I speak to your social value manager and find out what you're doing in this community and how you can help my organization, or can you give my pupils work experience? Because the reality is that legislation requires us to do this now, and our frameworks require us to do it. And so if companies aren't doing it, they really need to pull the socks up and get on with it. And I realize that some people aren't quite sure about how to do it, so that's kind of part of my mission.
So, in my lifetime in construction, I've always thought we've done ESG as a regional contractor. We've done ESG and really well, training people and giving them jobs throughout their lives. But as you say, there's legislation now that governs it. Do you want to just quickly outline which legislation? Can you outline which legislation it is? Because it's part of what we have to do in construction now, isn't it?
Yeah, so the Social Value Act of 2012 and the Public Procurement Notice 0620 and the upcoming Procurement Act, which has been slightly delayed, was due to come into place in October, but I think we're going for February next year now, all require public bodies to look for more than just the most economically advantaged tender. So now they've got to think about social value. They've got to ask about social value. They've got to ask how we're going above and beyond just delivering the contract at the best price. And from a framework commitment, they're asking for 12% of contract value, 40% of contract value, 20% of contract value, and that is what's requiring us to do it. But you're right, we do it anyway, right? That's what I found when I came in. I found out we fix fences, we fill in potholes, we raise money, we have corporate charities, we go into schools, we try to do succession planning, we look for our future talent pipeline, we are apprentice spotting. We've always done apprentices properly, I think. I think, I remember the YTS scheme when people used to get cheaply paid and then thrown out at the end of it. And I think also, I've had friends whose children have done apprenticeship schemes, and then when their apprenticeship is over, they've been let go, and then another apprentice is brought in to train. And to me, that's not an ethical way of dealing with apprentices. Apprentices is about ensuring the future of the company, looking for our future leadership, looking for our future trades, ensuring that people have a job for life. It might not always be with us, but it gives them the skills and the opportunities to be able to move on in life. I think that's really, really important. And so I think construction has always done that properly. I think what construction hasn't been doing properly, potentially, is measuring it, recording it, understanding what they're doing. So don't tell anybody, but my job's really easy.
Well, let me ask a slightly difficult question then, Sue, because I worry that social value is now becoming a competitive tool. You talk about tenders asking for 20% or 40% of the value coming back as social value. It's becoming a commercially competitive element of our bidding.
Yeah.
And yet you've talked around about the variation in how you measure it, and it's being quite a challenge in how you measure it. In your position as chair of the social value group, how do you advise members of the Constructing Excellence to sort of measure their value?
Oh, that's a really good question. So we haven't actually got the theme group up and running yet. So we
Oh,
are
come
going to
on,
be
it's
asking the
advertised.
we are going to be asking the group what it is, what they want from the group. So if what they want to know is how to measure, then we'll help them learn how to measure. But um, often clients will say the way that they want things measured. So depending on the client, they may dictate or request that a certain mandate, rather than dictate perhaps, that a certain system or certain set of proxies is used, so that they're not comparing different things from different contractors,
Mhm.
because different contractors are using different proxies. So it's probably not down to me to tell people how to do that. It's probably something that's more client led rather than what. So
Ah,
that's probably what I'm going to tell them, Mark. What does your client want you to do? Because
but
actually, that's what social value is, right? It's not us doing to communities, it's doing with communities. So the most essential part of social value is that we get out into the community, we find out who the people are, and we find out what they need from us. We don't just go in and go, oh, that park looks a little bit scruffy, let's go and do some weeding. That's going to make us all feel good. But is it really what the local community wants?
mhm. So it sounds like the advice to contractors is going to be go and ask your client what social value means in the context of their project that they're delivering, because at the end of the day, they're paying for it. I suspect many clients will say, "Well, could you go and find out what that means
Yeah,
for
yeah,
for my local community?" Because a lot of our clients are fundamentally absent from their local communities. They're investing in an area that they may not actually call their own community. So it's there's quite a challenge there. And I know from one of my duties is, which I enjoy every year, is scoring CE the Constructive Excellence Awards. And the question always is, well, what's the social value delivered on this? And we have exactly the problem you outlined. Well, it depends. I'm measuring it this way, I'm measuring it that way, and we get vastly different answers. And it's just impossible to compare apples with apples.
yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
it sounds though we should be asking our clients how it wants to be measured and how we can respond to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also sometimes you're right, the clients don't always know what they want, even when they've got a
Hmm.
social value policy in place. It might be quite wide. It might be, that they want a greener borough, or help for disadvantaged people, and that's quite a broad church that they're asking us to get involved with.
Hmm.
But and I think realistically, a big part of social value, if we're using metrics, is local spend and local employment. So
Hmm.
if we have got our feet on the ground with local employment and local spend, why don't we ask those people?
Hmm.
We ask our site managers to ask around in the community, and the site managers are brilliant at knowing what's around in the
Yeah.
community. They talk to the store holders in the market square that they're doing. They talk to the elderly people in the flats that we're having, we're doing flood remediation
Hmm.
works on. They are the people who are there. They are the people who can ask alongside me. Obviously, I go in there and I chat to them as well. But they're my eyes on the ground, they're my eyes and ears,
Yeah.
right? And then our local spend is with our local subcontractors. So let's get the supply chain involved. Let's talk to our subcontractors about what's important to them.
Hmm.
Otherwise, realistically, you're doing to the community rather than doing with the community.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, two questions really flow from that. And so, I mean, on if we've got competitive um, that social value, should we be making allowance in our tenders for it, or do you think it's something that we do enough of generally? We've just got to be better at recording it and demonstrating it. But if
I
it's,
think
if you've got to provide 40% of the value back as social value, is there a cost of doing that we ought to be adding back into tenders?
So I think most companies have already covered that in one way or another, right? So if you've allowed 2 volunteer days per employee in your business, you have already allowed in your head, in your plans, in your business plans, that you potentially are going to lose, if you've got 100 employees, 200 people days per year, which is
Mm,
almost a full-time employee. So
yeah,
you've already built that into everything that you're doing.
yeah.
Um, if your training and recruitment is about future talent pipeline, then you will have allowed in your budget for people to go out and do that recruitment. And it won't just be a recruitment manager, because your apprentices and your people are the best people to sell your business. So
Mm,
you need to have them as your ambassadors. And so you've got to allow time for them to go into schools. You've got to allow time for people to come onto sites. So I think I think it's already there. I think it
yeah.
is business as usual, although I'm a little bit hesitant to say it's business as usual, because social value should be something added, right? So, but there is an element of business as usual that, we have planned it, we do it,
Mhm.
and if we haven't, we should have done.
Yeah, yeah. And we, as you say, we've got access to all these people and all these levers. For me, it's just a question of changing priorities slightly on while we're doing our everyday activities. Which comes on to the next question is, we've got, as a main contractor, you've obviously got a large supply chain of coming down within to deliver that project.
Yeah.
Um, do you find that all your supply chain have a similar way of recording value, or is that a different? Do you struggle to get that information back up to the client to demonstrate what's going on?
So one of the things that I've been doing is going out to see some of the SMEs, which I can record a proxy against as an expert helping them with social value.
Yep.
Um, but I have been going out to see SMEs to help them understand what they are already doing, because, as we've said, some of them are already doing it. They just don't recognise that they're doing it. And then when they're finding that they're putting in bids, they are struggling because they don't know how to talk about what they've been doing. So that's one of the things that I go out and talk to SMEs about. And particularly within our subcontractors, a lot of them have got apprentices, so making sure that site managers are aware so that they will record the apprentices on site, and then building some stories. We did some great stories last year on the apprentices that were on our projects, our apprentices and subcontractor apprentices. And some contractors are mandating it now
Mm,
in the contracts. It's trickling down that way. How many apprentices are you going to provide on this project? How many work experiences and that sort of thing, and that's become part of the contractual arrangements.
mm, mm. I mean, one of the things which I often worry or wonder about on social value is whether we've got the opportunity to be a bit more self-centered as an industry. So you're talking about apprenticeships and work experience, which for me is what we ought to be doing to promote our industry. We're all aware that we've got a desperate shortage of skills. We're aware that we've got an aging population within construction, and I think there's an opportunity to use the social value requirements in contracts to be more self-centered as an industry, and to make sure that we've got opportunities that for bringing people into the sector, and supporting what we do in the sector, rather than necessarily, as you say, weeding the local allotment. Albeit that's a very good, it's a good thing to do. But actually, if we're being competitively measured about what we're doing, then actually we ought to be doing something for the industry, because we have a number of challenges that we've got to overcome.
The great thing about social value, though, is that it does cover all these things. So
Yeah.
it covers the economy, the supporting of the local economy. It covers the skills and supporting of jobs and skills and growth. And then there's a section around well-being, which is the parts not only looking after the community, but also looking after our own people. So the
Mhm.
employee well-being that we do, the equality, diversity, inclusion, all those sorts of things are uncovered. Probably the most underreported section of social value within the proxies is the environment. So most companies are
Okay.
not great on reporting what they're doing for the environment. And I have to admit that's one of my weak spots as well. So it's something I'm going to work very closely with our sustainability manager around,
Mhm.
about getting those sorts of things covered and realizing what we're doing over and above what is business as usual. So please don't ask me any more about that, because I definitely my weak point.
Well, I'll point you into some other of your predecessors on this podcast saying that carbon measurement is going to be mandatory for the whole industry within the next few years,
Oh
and
wow.
that so there's plenty of people talking about how that should happen and how that actually works.
Yeah, I want to go back, Mark, to something you said about our resources when we talk about volunteering. When I was first interviewed to come on board as a social value manager in that 5 years ago, um, my line manager to be said to me, "How do you feel about not having a budget?" And I said, "Well, I've worked with charities for a long time and I've never really had a budget. I've always just had to create something out of nothing using the resources that I have." Um, Having a commercial background, having worked in retail banking, kind of makes you very aware of, at least let it break even.
Yeah,
But actually, I've got, as a social value manager, I've got the resources of the company. So I've got the company name, I've got Stepnell's name, Stepnell's reputation. I've got a fantastic team of people around me, all of whom are willing to get engaged. And I
yeah,
think, those resources can't be undervalued. They are having an apprentice who's willing to go in and talk to young people is a huge thing. Having people who are
mm,
prepared to go and get their hands dirty is a huge thing. And the volunteering helps people who wouldn't necessarily normally work together. So it bridges that gap perhaps between office and site, or between director and apprentice.
mm,
So you get the different groups of people working together in a way that they wouldn't normally.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's mix up of people and getting people to meet people. It's a bit sort of reverse mentoring and mentoring both at the same time that you can do. And I agree with you. If you've got enthusiastic people who want to talk about themselves, then you can take on the world, can't you? But there are
Yeah.
there are many people who think that they're running charities anyway. If you look at construction making 1.5% on turnover, most people think we might be running charities as it is.
Well, it's an interesting point, isn't it? So I I think I was quite surprised at how unprofitable construction was when I came into it, but that's kind of coming from a banking background of, you know, X billion pounds profits, and keeping an eye on that even though I wasn't working on it. But then I can never quite remember what the percentage of profits was. Sometimes you can talk big numbers, but does 22 billion pounds profit matter if turnover is, you
Yeah,
know, a trillion or whatever the bigger number is?
yeah, yeah,
Um, but also we talk about diversity, don't we? And I think, I've always lived by, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
yeah.
And if we don't diversify, if we diversify, could we be more profitable? If we change things, could we be more profitable?
Hmm.
I don't know the answer to that. I see it debated a little bit in things like LinkedIn, but I don't see anybody coming up with any answers. Just the
Oh,
question.
there's lots of answers. I think the answer, if you don't try it, then you'll definitely the answer is definitely no. If you do try it, you've got all sorts of opportunities.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and actually, by
definitely.
trying these things, you actually learn an awful lot more about where the risks are and where the opportunities lie.
Mm,
So I think one of the things we have to do in our industry is actually allow people to take risks, encourage them to take risks,
yeah,
because that's the only
yeah,
way they can grow.
yeah. And I think that no blame culture is quite important for that, isn't it?
No,
You
it
know,
is.
learning from what we've done. And going back to what we were talking about around social value and trying to help people come into the industry, trying to help people to grow. it- it's not about, if you don't take risks, nothing's really going to change, is it? Even if it's a
No.
tiny little risk.
Mhm.
Um, I have another mantra that I live by, which is ask somebody something every day that they might say no to.
And if they
It's
don't, you're not
quite
asking hard enough then by the
it's surprising how many people say yes when you're asked. And
yeah,
that comes from the days of volunteering, right? You don't get volunteers if you don't ask them to volunteer. So,
yeah.
ask somebody every day something they might say no to.
That's a good idea. I might use that myself, Sue. I think I'd say it pushes the boundaries, doesn't it? That's what it's all about.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
It does. So I'm just wondering, you've been 5 years doing this job in the industry. What are the most exciting areas you've seen in social value? What are the sort of the best case studies that you might offer to people that you've seen for what is often quite a little bit of work from our side, some huge improvements. And it's you know, I think it'd be useful, from somebody with your perspective to understand how is give some examples, some solid examples of what best practice actually looks like, or some of the best examples might be.
So one of my favourite things is that we work with an organisation called Leicestershire Cares, who give us lots of opportunities to work with people who face barriers of all sorts within the community. And by working alongside them, we get to see people grow. So I did a mock interview with a young woman there, probably about 18 months ago. And, it's a bit tricky interviewing people, isn't it? You give them that horrible question, tell me a little bit about yourself, which is supposed to make them relax.
Yeah, yeah,
And if you're not careful, you get, particularly with younger people, I'm 15 years old, I've got 3 brothers and sisters and 2 dogs and a cat, and blah,
yeah.
blah, 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 a whole lot of stuff that you don't really need to know. Um, and so, but she couldn't answer the question at all. She was so anxious that
So
she couldn't answer
nervous.
the
Yeah.
question.
Hmm.
So I said to her, "What is it you'd like to do?" And she said, "I'd like to work with animals." And I said, "Well, tell me about your love of animals." And she just opened up.
Yeah.
She was, she could talk about, difficult to talk about herself, very, very happy to talk about animals, hugely knowledgeable about animals. Um, so we had this little mock interview, gave us some feedback, and then I have seen her 3 or 4 times since. And
Hmm.
every time I see her, she's moved on a little bit further, and she has got a volunteering job now in an animal shelter. She's very, very much more confident. You can see her moving towards being work ready. And to me,
Mm.
that's a massive thing, being able to see the impact on her that I've been a little part of. Other people have been involved. I haven't done it. I can't take all the credit for it.
Yeah.
But for me, the reward is to see her moving on in her life, and
Mm.
her benefiting from that. And
Mm.
I mentioned earlier on about working with some of the most privileged young people in the world. And I think, those people, from the time that they were tiny babies, were told you can do anything you want, you can be anything you want. And we have a lot of people in society who haven't been told that.
Mm.
So for me, the rewards are always going to be around seeing people's lives improve, seeing people take that extra step to being able to walk into a room and say, I belong here, or feel
Yeah.
I belong here.
Yeah.
Whoever you are, if you've been invited for interview, you belong here.
Mm.
So walk into that room and greet that person as an equal, because they invited you to their table and you deserve to sit at it.
Absolutely, and it's why I think you talk about those privileged people, they haven't got far to travel, and it's very easy to see success in those people, but it's the people who've got that a long way to go to get those small gains, which is the most satisfying, and actually where we as a society ought to be focusing our attention,
Yeah,
bringing
absolutely.
everybody up to those levels of confidence. If nothing else, it's the confidence to be able to do things.
Yeah. And those people are diversifying our industry. Those people are bringing new ideas that perhaps we hadn't considered.
Hmm.
Those people are bringing lived experience that we haven't had, that not all of us have had. I'm not going to speak for
Yeah.
everybody in the industry because I don't know everybody's background, but having that diversification of people, having inviting people to our table, is a really big part of what we need to do.
Mm. So, we've had a good canter through the social value and all the areas that we ought to be looking at. I normally sort of finish these interviews, Sue, with asking, if you could wave your magic wand in the industry, what might 2 or 3 things change that you
Okay.
were hope you might like to see differently done say in 5 years' time? Where would you focus your wand, your fairy dust?
I'd like everybody in our industry to have a really positive experience of employment, that they wanted to share with everyone else so much that they could convince even more people to come into construction.
A good answer.
So I have said, um, to Mr. Wakeford, to Tom Wakeford, that I never have the Sunday scaries. I enjoy every single minute of my job. And at the end of the month, you pay me. And I want everybody to have that experience of work because I think that's an amazing thing to do.
Mm,
To be able to enjoy your job, to be able to go out and sell your job to people, and to help people have a greater understanding of our industry. We do need to attract more people. We need people to understand what a fabulous industry it is to work in.
mhm. Brilliant. Well, sir, it's been a really, really interesting canter through social value. Clearly, you've got the passion to make it all happen. I wish you every luck with your new group at this with Constructing Excellence Midlands. Would urge anybody who would like to understand more about social value in the Midlands to join your group, because it sounds though there's plenty to learn and plenty of opportunity. And we've got a long way to go if we're going to get everybody in industry loving their jobs and be able to tell everybody what amazing industry we're working in. I think some of us are convinced already, but so it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Mark. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.